One of my favorite things to make for both myself as well as to give as a gift is spiced pears. I especially love them in the winter holiday months because they have a lot of those spices that we've come to associate with that time of year. They've got cinnamon, cloves, ginger, but they also have some vinegar in them, which makes them really light and refreshing. So they're wonderful on their own, on yogurt or oatmeal in the morning or just as a snack. They're also really a great accompaniment to some of the richer meals we have during the winter months, like a roast meat or a gingerbread. So they have a huge variety of uses. And then once you've eaten the pears, you get a little bonus because the syrup that we're going to be canning them in is also delicious and can be added to different beverages. You can pour it into some seltzer or some sparkling wine. It's basically just a simple syrup. So anything that you would add a simple syrup to, you can pour it into, like a cocktail or really anything you can imagine. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare our pears. I have 3.5 pounds of pears that I've washed. These are Bartlett pears, which are a great variety for canning. And then I also have in here an anti-darkening solution. So as I peel and cut my pears, I'm going to put them into the anti-darkening solution. And what that is it's water that's been treated with an acid to prevent the fruit from oxidizing or turning brown. I use 1 gallon cold water with 1 teaspoon of citric acid. You can also use ascorbic acid. With the same ratio, 1 teaspoon ascorbic acid to 1 gallon cold water. They sell anti-darkening solutions in the canning supply section, which I think canning supply sections are being restocked by now. And just follow then the manufacturer's directions. You could also use lemon juice if that's all you have. You would need 3/4 cup lemon juice for a gallon of cold water. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to peel the pears, cut out the cores, and then cut them into slices. So I'm on my last couple of pears here. And as I mentioned, I'm using Bartlett pears. So whether you use Bartlett or whatever variety you do use, when you're selecting the pears, you want to make sure that you're getting ripe pears, but that they're still firm. We are going to be cooking these in the syrup for 5 minutes. So if you have pears that are really ripe and already on the soft side, they're probably going to break apart. So you want to make sure they're firm. And as I mentioned, we're doing 3.5 pounds of pears. So I've been peeling the pears 1 or 2 at a time, cutting them and putting them into the solution. So I'm just going to show you quickly how I do core the pears. So I slice the pear vertically in half, and then I slice it vertically again. And then I just at an angle take my knife and slice out the core. I find that much easier than using a spoon or a melon baller or whatever to scoop out the seeds. So once I get these last bits of pear sliced up and put into my solution, I'm going to clean this up and then get the ingredients ready to make our syrup with. These are the rest of the ingredients that we're going to need to make the pears. I have 2.5 cups granulated sugar, 1.25 cups of vinegar. I'm using apple cider vinegar. You can sub any vinegar though that you think sounds good for this, as long as it's at a 5% acidity. The original recipe I'm using calls for just a white vinegar. I like the flavor in apple cider vinegar. I also think a white wine vinegar would be great in there. As long as it's 5% acidity, go ahead and sub whatever vinegar you would like. I have 1 cup water, and then for our spices, I've got 7 sticks of cinnamon, about 3 inches long, and 2 tablespoons of cloves, whole cloves. And then I have 2 teaspoons of fresh ginger that I have grated on a microplane. You can also just peel and mince the ginger. And then you'll need a little spice bag. This is a muslin tea bag, spice bag. You could wrap, you can use some cheesecloth or just, a scrap of fabric that you have. Just, make sure it's not something that's gonna bleed some kind of color into it. So we're gonna take the dried spices and the ginger and just put them into the spice bag. I'm wondering if I can do this gracefully without spilling. We'll see. Okay, so I got my spices into the spice bag. I managed to get them pretty much all in without getting them all over the counter. And now I'm going to pour the rest of the ingredients into a pot. I want to use a pot large enough that's going to fit both the syrup ingredients as well as the pears, which we'll add later. So we've got the sugar, vinegar, and water. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to put this on my stove and bring it up to a boil. We're not going to add the spice bag just yet. So right now we're just going to bring the sugar, vinegar, and water up to a boil. And already on the stove I have my canning pot ready with my jars coming up to a simmer just to warm them. I don't think I mentioned, but this recipe makes 4 pints, give or take. So right now I prepared 5-pint jars as well as an 8-ounce jar. That way, in case we have any extra, I'll have a jar all ready. Okay, so my syrup mixture has just come up to a boil. So now I'm going to add that spice bag that we prepared earlier. I'm just going to drop that in and let it boil for 5 minutes. After it's boiled for 5 minutes, I am going to drain my pears from the anti-darkening solution, add my pears to the syrup mixture, and let them simmer for an additional 5 minutes. So our syrup mixture has been boiling about 5 minutes. I accidentally set my kitchen timer for 5 hours, not 5 minutes, but I think we've been boiling about 5 minutes now. So here are the pears that had been in the anti-darkening solution that I drained. I'm just going to pour these in. See, that's why we needed the larger pot. Ooh, that vinegar's strong. And give them a little stir. Once I see that the liquid has come back up to a simmer, we don't need to come all the way back up to a boil. I'm going to let them simmer for about 5 minutes. What we're looking for is to have them we want them to soften a bit, but to still be firm. Okay. I've got my pears in syrup right here. So they've warmed through, they've gotten a little soft, but they're definitely still nice and firm. And I've got my jars that I've just taken out of my canning pot, so those are nice and warm. And I'm going to fill the jars now. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use a slotted spoon, and I'm going to just scoop the pears and fill them into the jar. And I want to fill as much as possible to within a ½ inch of the top of the jar. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave then a ½ inch of headspace with the syrup. So we're going to get those in. You kind of have to shake them and push them down with your fingers a little. And then using a ladle, I'm going to go in and get that delicious spiced syrup we made and fill the jar. And this is where we are looking for that ½ inch of headspace, which is the space from the top of the liquid to the top of the jar. Let's just get that down. Let's see. Okay, so I've got a little more space for some more syrup to put in. Okay, there we go. Then I just want to take out any extra air bubbles that might be in there. Oh, and look at that, my pears all pop right up. So let's just give those guys a little nudge down. I'm gonna check the headspace to see if I need to add any more liquid. Nope, we're still at 1/2 inch. So then I'm just gonna wipe the top of the jar to get off any syrup or little pear pieces that may be on top. Add a lid. And then, so that jar is all ready to go into the canner. Now I'm going to go and do the rest of my jars. I've got my jars all filled. It did end up making exactly 4 pints as the recipe had suggested. So I'm just going to load them back into my canner now and bring that up to a boil. And I have mentioned this in a previous video, but I do think it's worth mentioning again. For anyone who notices, I am using a pressure canner pot, but I am using it as a hot water bath canner. I am not locking the lid, so all it is a large pot with a rack and a lid. So I'm gonna put my lid on my pot there. I'm going to bring it up to I'm going to bring my water up to a boil and then process these for 15 minutes. So I brought my canning pot up to a boil. I let those pears process for 15 minutes at a full boil. Once the 15 minutes was done, I turned off the heat, took the lid off and let them sit for about 5 minutes. So now we're going to take them out of the pot and just put them in a place where they can be left undisturbed, draft free for 12 to 24 hours. I usually just do it overnight. Then I'll come back tomorrow morning. I'll check the seals, clean the jars up, and label them before storing them. And with spiced pears, same as with a lot of canned items that have some spice to them, it's great to let them sit for about 2 weeks and really let the flavors meld and get all delicious. Okay, so there are our spiced pears that are great for keeping for yourself or for giving to friends. Thank you.